This is the story of the largest moving object ever built by man, a monument to the industrial age that promised to conquer the unpredictable violence of the ocean. This is the story of the RMS Titanic, built to be the ultimate statement of luxury, power, and safety. She was deemed unsinkable by the very best engineers and businessmen in the world. But on her first voyage, in the cold, black heart of the North Atlantic, she struck a single piece of ancient ice and was swallowed by the sea. This documentary explores the incredible engineering ambition that created the ship, the arrogance that led to her tragic end, and the profound way her sinking shattered the confidence of an entire era. This story is 6 chapters long, split into 10 detailed parts, and we hope you love it. Chapter 1, The Story of the Titanic, is not just the story of a ship, it's the story of a ruthless corporate war fought on the North Atlantic. By the early 1900s, crossing the Atlantic was a symbol of global power, and the business was dominated by 2 massive rival British shipping companies, Cunard and White Star Line. Cunard had focused on speed. Their ships, like the Lusitania and Mauretania, were fast, powerful racers designed to break the world record for the fastest transatlantic crossing. Speed was money, speed was prestige, and speed won headlines. The White Star Line, however, decided to take a different, far bolder gamble. They decided they would stop chasing speed records and instead dominate the competition through sheer scale and unparalleled luxury. White Star Line decided they wouldn't build a ship. They would build a floating palace, a piece of detached civilization designed to make the journey across the ocean utterly forgettable. In 1907, the White Star Line executives met in London and laid out their master plan. They would commission 3 massive sister ships, the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. They would be faster than average, yes, but their real claim to fame would be their size and opulence. The Titanic would be the second of the 3, and she would be built to a scale no one had ever imagined. This meant building an ocean liner nearly 270 meters 882 feet long, weighing over 46,000 tons. She would be so massive that she would require new harbors and new construction methods just to accommodate her. This decision was a huge, defining moment for the entire company. It was a massive financial risk, betting hundreds of millions of dollars that the world would pay any price to travel not just quickly, but in supreme comfort. This was the launch of an era of immense, audacious corporate hubris. And the consequences of this gamble would be paid in the freezing waters of the Atlantic. The incredible scale of the White Star Line's ambition meant that the Titanic could not be built just anywhere. The contract was handed to the massive Harland and Wolf shipyard in Belfast, Ireland, a shipyard known for building some of the world's largest ships. The construction of the Titanic and her sister ship Olympic took place side by side in massive slipway. This was not a quiet, automated process. It was a brutal, deafening, and intensely dangerous manual effort that involved over 15,000 workers. Imagine standing in the yard. The air was thick with the coal smoke from the forges and the deafening, constant sound of thousands of riveters working in unison. These men hammered 3 million iron and steel rivets into the hula process that was agonizingly slow and incredibly dangerous. Workers risked falling hundreds of feet from the towering superstructure or being crushed by massive pieces of steel swinging through the air. The job was so lethal that, tragically, several workers lost their lives during the 2 years of construction. The construction was a powerful physical embodiment of the era's Edwardian class system. On one hand, you had the thousands of laborers risking life and limb for a small wage to build the hull. On the other hand, inside the hull, the world's most luxurious interiors were being crafted. The Titanic was designed to be a complete floating city, mirroring the finest hotels in London. She included an ornate grand staircase rising through 7 decks, a fully equipped gymnasium, Turkish baths, a heated swimming pool, and multiple fine dining restaurants. The focus was so heavily placed on luxury and the aesthetics of the first-class accommodations that many critical, less glamorous aspects of the ship's safety were treated as secondary considerations. The ship's final cost was staggering, making it one of the most expensive vessels ever built. This immense cost, combined with the groundbreaking size, fueled an unprecedented public relations campaign. The Titanic was not just finished, she was relentlessly promoted as the ultimate expression of human technological mastery, a ship that surely could never sink. This myth of unsinkability was about to be put to the ultimate test. Chapter 2, the core of the Titanic's legend, and ultimately her tragedy, was the widespread belief that she was unsinkable. This wasn't just a marketing slogan. It was a deeply held conviction by her builders and the public, based on groundbreaking, but ultimately flawed, engineering. The Titanic's design incorporated what were, for the era, state-of-the-art, safety features. 1. Double-bottom hull. The ship had a second layer of steel plating beneath the main hull, designed to protect her if she ran aground or struck a submerged object. 2. Watertight compartments. The most vaunted safety feature was a system of 16 watertight compartments in the lower decks. These compartments were separated by massive steel doors that could be sealed instantly from the bridge. The theory was simple. If one or even a few of these compartments were breached and filled with water, the doors would seal. and the ship would simply float higher in the water, carrying its passengers safely to port. The naval architects confidently declared that the Titanic could stay afloat even if any 4 of her 16 compartments were flooded. This was revolutionary for its time. No ship had ever incorporated such extensive passive safety measures. The newspapers, eager for headlines, picked up on this and amplified it, using terms like practically unsinkable, which quickly morphed into the absolute declaration of unsinkable. This powerful myth gave both the crew and the passengers an immense, false sense of security. However, the very safety features that gave the Titanic her unsinkable reputation harbored a critical, hidden design flaw that would prove fatal. The naval architects, in their pursuit of both luxury and what they considered sufficient safety, made a compromise that no one considered dangerous at the time. This subtle oversight, a small detail in the vast, complex design, would be the key to unlocking the ship's fate when she finally met her destiny in the cold, dark Atlantic. The myth was strong, but the reality of physics was about to expose its terrible weakness. The unsinkable myth was built on the watertight compartments, but their design contained a critical, fatal flaw. While the 16 compartments extended upward from the double-bottomed hull, the internal dividing walls, known as bulkheads, did not reach the full height of the ship. They only rose partway up the ship's internal structure. This detail, considered acceptable by naval standards of the day, was the Titanic's Achilles heel. Imagine the ship's lower deck as an ice cube tray. Each compartment is a cube. If you fill 1 or 2 cubes with water, the tray still floats. This was the principle behind the Titanic's unsinkability, however. If a crack ran across too many of those compartments, or if enough compartments filled with water, the weight of the water would cause the bow of the ship to dip lower and lower. As the bow dipped, the water from the flooded compartments would begin to spill over the top of the bulkheads into the next supposedly watertight compartment. This meant the watertight compartments weren't truly sealed off from each other at the top. Once water reached a certain height, it could cascade from one compartment to the next, like water overflowing from one section of an ice cube tray into the next. This would allow the entire ship to flood, compartment by compartment, from bow to stern. This design choice was not due to malice or gross negligence. It was a common practice, and no one seriously anticipated a collision that would breach so many compartments at once. The architects, led by Thomas Andrews, believed the ship was adequately safe for any foreseeable accident. But the 4-compartment rule, the idea that the Titanic could survive if any 4 compartments flooded, did not account for a long, shallow gash that would breach 5 or more compartments simultaneously. Furthermore, another glaring safety deficiency lay in the lifeboats. The British Board of Trade Regulations, written for much smaller ships, stipulated that a vessel of the Titanic's size only needed enough lifeboat capacity for 962 people. The Titanic was designed to carry over 3,500 passengers and crew. Even with the White Star Line adding a few extra collapsible boats, the ship sailed with capacity for only 1,178 people, barely 1/3 of the maximum number of people on board. This was a direct result of balancing safety regulations with the aesthetic demands of a luxurious, uncrowded deck. The unsinkable myth was so powerful that the idea of needing enough lifeboats for everyone seemed absurd, and the consequences of this fatal oversight would be catastrophic. Chapter 3 On April 10, 1912. The great, gleaming white hull of the RMS Titanic cast off from Southampton, England, to begin her maiden voyage across the Atlantic. This was the pinnacle of the Edwardian age, a time of immense confidence, wealth, and technological certainty. The ship wasn't just transporting people, she was transporting an entire, rigid social structure across the ocean, sailing directly into the future. The atmosphere on board was one of unrestrained opulence and sheer scale. The Titanic was a complete luxury hotel on the water, designed to make the passengers forget they were even at sea. In the first-class accommodations, wealthy magnates, industrialists, and socialites dressed in the latest fashions, dining on elaborate 10-course meals in the glittering a la carte restaurant. They were attended by hundreds of specialized staff, enjoyed music in the lavish reception rooms, and strolled the deck with the absolute certainty that they were aboard the safest object man had ever created. This level of luxury had been meticulously crafted to attract the world's richest travelers, making the Titanic a guaranteed commercial success for the White Star Line. Down below, the atmosphere was dramatically different. The second-class passengers, often professionals and teachers, enjoyed amenities that surpassed the first-class cabins of older liners. Yet they were entirely separate from the elite above. Further down, in third class, immigrants and laborers shared large, open cabins. But even they experienced a level of cleanliness and comfort better than any previous steerage crossing. The ship was a perfect, sealed microcosm of the strict class divides of the era. The unspoken rule was simple. Everyone could see the grand staircase, but only those with a first-class ticket could touch it. For the first 3 days, the voyage was a spectacular triumph of speed and comfort. Captain Edward J. Smith, a veteran commander preparing for his retirement, pushed the massive vessel at a speed of about 22 knots, just under her maximum potential. They were not attempting a speed record, but they were sailing fast. relying on the size and the mirth of unsinkability to guarantee a safe crossing. But this speed, combined with a growing wave of unseen danger, was about to set the stage for one of history's most sudden and tragic disasters. As the Titanic sailed rapidly westward, the ship's wireless room began receiving a series of chilling, critical messages. These were not greetings. They were ice warnings sent by other ships that had encountered massive ice fields and bergs floating far south of the usual lanes in the North Atlantic. The presence of the ice was due to an unusually mild winter, which had sent a huge congregation of massive old icebergs drifting into the transatlantic shipping corridors. The Titanic received at least 6 separate ice warnings over the course of Sunday, April 14th. However, a dangerous atmosphere of complacency and confidence permeated the ship's command. Captain Smith was sailing a ship that was literally called Unsinkable. Speed was the expected performance standard, and the captain and the White Star Line management were keen to arrive in New York on schedule. The warnings were often acknowledged, but they were generally not treated with the urgency they demanded. One particularly crucial warning came late that afternoon from the steamer Messabat, reporting heavy pack ice and a great number of large icebergs. This vital message was delivered to the wireless room, but, because the wireless operators were not full-time crew, they were employed by the Marconi Company. They were focused on relaying dozens of non-essential lucrative passenger messages. The Masaba warning was acknowledged and then set down under a weight of passenger traffic, never making it to the bridge. As the sun set on that fateful Sunday, the temperature dropped sharply, and the sea became unusually flat and calm, a condition known as a black calm. This phenomenon was disastrously bad for spotting ice, as there were no telltale waves breaking at the base of the bergs to reveal their presence in the dark. Despite the accumulation of warnings, Captain Smith maintained the ship's high speed. It was a clear, dark night, and the crew was relying entirely on their lookouts, spotting the hazard in time. The ship was sailing confidently into an invisible, frozen trap, driven by the heiress belief that technology and speed could overcome any obstacle nature presented. Chapter 4. The moment of disaster arrived at 11:40 p.m. on Sunday, April 14th. The air was intensely cold, and the ocean surface was glassy and calm, making the black base of any iceberg completely invisible against the dark, moonless water. High above the deck, in the crow's nest, were lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, their eyes strained against the inky blackness. At that exact moment, Fleet saw it, a massive dark shape looming directly ahead, an iceberg. There was no telltale white foam breaking at its base, only a sudden, solid mass where there had been only darkness moments before. Fleet immediately rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge, shouting the chilling, now infamous words, "Iceberg right ahead." The officer on watch, First Officer William Murdoch, reacted instantly. He issued 3 critical commands. 1. Hard a starboard, a sudden sharp turn to the left. 2. Stop the engines. 3. Full astern, reverse the engines. This was the critical life-or-death moment where the sheer size and momentum of the Titanic betrayed her. The ship was so huge, moving at such a high speed, about 22 knots, that even the instant response was too slow. It took a massive effort to swing the bow, and while the ship did begin to turn, it was not enough. Instead of hitting the iceberg head-on, which the Titanic was structurally designed to potentially survive, the ship only grazed it. Along the starboard right side of the massive hull, beneath the waterline, there was a series of grinding, jarring sounds that lasted for nearly 10 seconds. Most passengers, asleep in their cabins, barely felt the impact. Many assumed it was simply the ship shuddering as it shed speed. But on the lower decks, the crew knew instantly something was desperately wrong. The Titanic hadn't been stopped by the ice. She had been fatally wounded. The massive force of the impact had caused the ship's steel plates to buckle and separate, opening a thin, continuous gash that was allowing the icy ocean to pour into the vessel's deepest holds. The myth of unsinkability was about to collide violently with the laws of physics. Following the collision, Captain Smith and the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, immediately went below to survey the damage. This was the moment the reality of physics shattered the myth of unsinkability. The damage was subtle but fatal. The iceberg had not ripped a huge, gaping hole, but rather caused a series of thin, structural breaches across the joints of the steel plates, creating 6 separate, small openings along the starboard side. Critically, these breaches extended across the first 5 of the Titanic's watertight compartments. Andrews understood the ship's design better than anyone. He quickly performed a devastating calculation. The Titanic could float with any 4 of her 16 compartments, flooded but not 5. With 5 compartments taking on water, the weight would inevitably cause the bow to dip low enough for the water in the 5th compartment to spill over the top of the bulkheads into the 6th, then the 7th, and so on. The chain reaction of flooding was inevitable. Andrews stood before the captain and delivered the devastating technical verdict. The ship was mortally wounded. He estimated that the Titanic had perhaps 2 hours, maybe a little more, but certainly not enough time to be rescued. Captain Smith immediately ordered the ship's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, to send out the Universal Distress Signal, CQD, quickly followed by the new signal, SOS. The message was simple and shocking. The world's largest, safest ship was sinking, and she required immediate assistance. The news was met with disbelief by many ships that received the message. How could the Titanic be in peril? Yet the agonizing truth was unfolding in slow motion. The massive ship had sealed her watertight doors, but the water continued its slow, inexorable march upward. The psychological certainty of safety had vanished, replaced by the terrifying, chilling realization that more than 2,200 souls were trapped on a sinking vessel with barely 2 hours left before the freezing Atlantic claimed them. Chapter 5. The order to begin the evacuation was given just after midnight, but the initial response from the passengers was one of complete disbelief and denial. The air was intensely cold, and the immense, brightly lit ship seemed perfectly stable. Many first-class passengers, enjoying the warmth of the lounges, refused to leave their cocktails, convinced that they were simply being asked to take part in a drill. Many of the lifeboats were lowered to the decks half an hour after the collision, but still, few passengers were willing to leave the warmth and grandeur of the unsinkable Titanic for the terrifying emptiness of the freezing Atlantic. This hesitation, combined with the chaotic lack of training among the crew, resulted in an agonizing waste of capacity. The tragic math was immediate and brutal, with over 2,200 people on board and lifeboat. Capacity for only 1,178, nearly half the ship was doomed from the start. But in the frantic dark hours that followed, the situation was made worse by human error and the rigid social code of the time. The order was strictly given, women and children first. This heroic, chivalrous code of the Edwardian age defined who lived and who died. However, the evacuation was also tragically defined by the class structure of the ship. On the first-class decks, the boats were loaded relatively quickly, though many left half empty due to the passengers' refusal to believe they were in danger. The very first boat lowered held only 28 people, despite having room for 65. In the lower decks, the third-class passengers faced significant obstacles. They were initially kept below deck by gates, and were the last to be guided to the lifeboats, often struggling to navigate the ship's complex maze of corridors in the dark. While the first-class survival rate soared to over 60%, the rate for the third-class men plummeted to barely 16%. In the midst of the immense tragedy, human error, class barriers, and the paralyzing disbelief in the unsinkable myth ensured that dozens of lifeboats slipped into the black water half empty, leaving hundreds of people on the deck who would never have another chance at survival. The slow, inevitable end of the Titanic was now certain, and the wireless operators faced the heartbreaking task of sending their final, desperate messages to the silent, dark horizon. As the hours passed, the Titanic's angle grew steeper. Down in the wireless room, operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride worked heroically, sending distress calls until the very last moment. They were fighting through massive static, finally connecting with the RMS Carpathia, which immediately turned and steamed toward the location, but was hours away. However, the most crushing irony of the night was the presence of a ship far closer, the SS Californian. The Californian had stopped for the night, trapped in the same massive ice field that doomed the Titanic. She was less than 30 kilometers, 18 miles away. The Californian's wireless operator, having been up all day, had simply turned off his equipment and gone to sleep minutes before the Titanic struck the iceberg. The officers on the Californian S bridge saw the Titanic's running lights and even saw the distress flares, the rockets being fired high into the sky. Yet, they dismissed the rockets as company signaling or pyrotechnics, failing to recognize the universal symbol of a ship in peril. The Californian remained anchored, silent, and within sight, a spectator to a disaster she was hours too late to prevent. Back on the Titanic, the end was swift and terrifying. At around 2:18 a.m., the pressure on the flooded bow became too great. The immense structure, weakened by the strain, snapped in half between the third and fourth funnels. The stern section rose high into the air, silhouetted against the night sky, its enormous propellers exposed. The thousands of tons of metal groaned and tore with an ear-splitting sound described by survivors as a monstrous roar. Then, the final, dreadful silence. As the stern plunged, the power failed, and the lights of the great ship went out forever. Over 1,500 people were thrown into the freezing ocean, where the water temperature was approximately 2 degrees Celsius below freezing. In those temperatures, survival time was measured in minutes. The majority of those in the water died not from drowning, but from cardiac arrest caused by the extreme cold. The dream of the unsinkable ship ended in the chaotic darkness, leaving behind only the agonizing cries of the dying and the profound, silent failure of human technology and judgment. Chapter 6. The early morning hours of April 15, 1912, brought the world the most shocking news of the new century. When the RMS Carpathia finally arrived at the scene, they found a vast field of floating debris and a scattering of lifeboats holding the 705 survivors, many severely hypothermic. They found no trace of the Titanic. The news reached New York and London slowly, initially met with absolute disbelief. How could the largest, safest, and most technologically advanced symbol of the industrial age be gone? The White Star Line initially tried to minimize the extent of the disaster, but within hours, the full devastating reality was confirmed. The reaction was immediate, profound, and national. The sinking was more than just a massive loss of life. It was a psychological shockwave that shattered the immense confidence of the Edwardian era. The belief that technology could conquer nature and that modern man was immune to catastrophic failure was violently exposed as a lie. If the unsinkable Titanic could vanish on its first voyage, what else was vulnerable? The disaster exposed the fatal flaws in the era's relentless pursuit of speed and luxury over basic safety. The public demanded answers, and the tragedy quickly led to large, highly publicized government inquiries in both the United States and Great Britain. These investigations were intense, focusing not only on the immediate failures of the crew but on the structural and regulatory negligence that had allowed the ship to sail to its doom. The inquiries quickly confirmed the devastating truths we have discussed. 1. Speed. The ship maintained high speed despite receiving repeated ice warnings. 2. Safety. The number of lifeboats was criminally inadequate, a direct result of outdated regulations. 3. Judgment. The captain of the SS Californian had failed to act on the visible distress signals. The inquiries became a public reckoning, revealing the arrogance and the cost of human hubris. The lessons learned from that terrible night would immediately and permanently rewrite the rules of global maritime travel, ensuring that such a tragedy where the pursuit of luxury trumped life could never happen again. The loss of the Titanic resulted in the swiftest and most comprehensive overhaul of maritime law in history. The profound shame of the tragedy that so many lives were lost unnecessarily due to outdated regulations and a failure of common sense forced governments to act. The disaster proved that the technological hubris of the age had outrun basic human decency. The immediate and most direct result of the disaster was the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, established in 1914. This treaty, still fundamental to global shipping today, made two critical changes. 1. Lifeboats for all. SOLAS mandated that all ships must carry enough lifeboat capacity for every single person on board, regardless of the ship's size. This officially ended the era where a ship could rely on the myth of unsinkability to justify inadequate life-saving equipment. 2. 24-hour wireless watch. The tragedy of the nearby Silent Californian led to a requirement that all ocean-going vessels must maintain a 24-hour wireless watch. No operator could simply turn off their radio and go to sleep. Emergency signals had to be monitored constantly. Beyond these laws, the disaster led to the creation of the International Ice Patrol, a service run today by the U.S. Coast Guard, which monitors ice formations in the North Atlantic to warn ships away from dangerous corridors. The Titanic remains the ultimate cautionary tale. She was the final, gleaming expression of 19th-century optimism, the belief that science, wealth, and industry could solve every problem and conquer every corner of the natural world. Her sinking was the moment that optimism died, replaced by a sobering awareness of technological limits and human frailty. The ship of dreams was lost to the ocean, but her legacy is that every single person who steps onto a modern ship today sails in a vessel made fundamentally safer by the terrible lessons learned on that cold, clear night in April 1912. The sinking of the Titanic taught the world that technology can fail. Regulations are not enough. And the greatest safety feature on any vessel is vigilance, not arrogance.